My daughter called me at 2 in the morning. Her voice was slurred, trembling with a terror that froze the blood in my veins. "Dad, please come get me," she whispered. When I arrived at her in-law's wealthy estate, her mother-in-law physically blocked the front door. She looked me dead in the eye and said she is not leaving. I am a retired construction contractor who spent a lifetime breaking through concrete and steel. No wooden door and no arrogant woman was going to keep me from my little girl. I forced my way in, and what I saw on that bedroom floor made my blood boil. Before I continue my story, please let me know what city or country you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe a father will do whatever it takes to protect his child. My name is Victor Caldwell. I am 70 years old. For over 4 decades, I worked as a commercial construction contractor right here in Illinois. I spent my life dealing with blueprints, load-bearing walls, and cold, hard steel. I am a man of logic and structure. You have to be when a single miscalculation can bring a 50-story building crashing down. I retired a few years ago, hoping to live a quiet life after losing my beloved wife, Sarah, a decade ago to a brutal illness. Sarah was the heart of our family. When she passed, she left behind a secret trust fund for our only daughter, Rachel. Rachel is 32 years old now, a dedicated pediatric nurse with a heart of gold. She married a man named Derek Thorne. Derek is a 35-year-old investment banker downtown. On paper, he is polished, successful, and charming. His mother, Evelyn Thorne, comes from old money up in the North Shore of Chicago. They live in a sprawling, isolated mansion that always felt more like a museum than a home to me. I never quite fit into their world of country clubs and cocktail parties, but I tolerated the condescension because Rachel seemed happy. I always taught my daughter to see the good in people, but sometimes people do not have any good in them at all. It all started on a freezing Tuesday night. I was asleep in my empty house when the sudden sharp ringing of my cell phone woke me up. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was exactly 2 in the morning. When you reach my age, a phone call at that hour never brings good news. I answered immediately. "Dad," a voice whispered. It was Rachel, but she did not sound like my daughter. Her words were heavily slurred, dragging together, as if she were fighting just to keep her eyes open. "Rachel. Sweetheart." "What is wrong?" I asked, sitting up straight, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. "Dad, please come get me," she gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her tone was laced with absolute raw terror. "They will not let me." Before she could finish her sentence, there was a muffled thud, a sharp gasp, and the line went completely dead. I shouted her name into the receiver, but there was only silence. I did not waste a single second trying to call her back. My contractor instincts kicked in immediately. When an alarm sounds on a job site, you do not ask questions, you act. I threw off the blankets, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and ran out to my truck. I unlocked my safe and took out my legally registered firearm. I am not a violent man, but I am a fiercely protective father. I placed the weapon securely inside my truck glove box, just in case. I did not know what I was walking into, but I knew my daughter was in grave danger. The drive to the North Shore usually takes 40 minutes. I made it in 25. The roads were deserted, covered in a thin layer of frost, but my mind was racing faster than my tires. Rachel is a nurse. She does not drink heavily. She does not take drugs. She is the most responsible, level-headed person I know. That slurred voice, that sheer panic, it simply did not make any logical sense. At 2:45 in the morning, my headlights swept across the imposing iron gates of the Thorne estate. The gates were surprisingly left wide open. I drove my truck right up the long, winding driveway and slammed it into park in front of their massive double doors. The house was entirely dark, except for one dim light on the second floor. Rachel and Derek's bedroom. I pounded my heavy fists against the solid oak front door. I did not ring the doorbell. I hammered on the wood with the force of a man who was ready to tear the house down brick by brick. A few moments later, the door swung open. Standing there was Evelyn Thorne, Derek's mother. Any normal person woken up at 3 in the morning by frantic knocking would be in pajamas looking disheveled and confused. Not Evelyn. She was fully dressed in a tailored blouse and expensive slacks. Her hair was perfectly styled and she wore a full face of makeup. She had not been sleeping. She had been awake waiting. "Victor, what on earth is the meaning of this disturbance?" she demanded, her voice dripping with cold, calculated arrogance. "Where is my daughter?" I demanded, stepping forward to enter the house. Evelyn crossed her arms and physically blocked the doorway, standing her ground with a defiant smirk. "Rachel is having a severe mental episode," she said smoothly, not a single trace of concern in her eyes. "She is completely hysterical. Derek gave her something to help her calm down, and she is finally resting. She cannot be disturbed right now. I suggest you go home, Victor. You are making a fool of yourself." I stared at this wealthy, entitled woman trying to dismiss me like I was the hired help. The stench of her lie was suffocating. I did not ask for her permission. I stepped forward using my broad shoulders to shove her aside. She stumbled back against the foyer wall, gasping in feigned outrage. "You cannot barge into my home!" she shrieked. "Watch me!" I growled. I took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, ignoring her shrill protests echoing behind me. I reached the second-floor hallway and headed straight for the master suite. The door was locked tight. I did not hesitate. 30 years of swinging sledgehammers and kicking down drywall had not entirely left my aging bones. I raised my heavy work boot and kicked the door right below the handle. The expensive wood splintered, the lock gave way, and the door flew open with a loud, violent crash. I rushed into the room and my breath caught painfully in my throat. The room was a complete disaster. Designer lamps were overturned, and the silk bedsheets were torn and dragged onto the floor. And there, lying unconscious on the cold bathroom tile, was my little girl, Rachel. I dropped to my knees beside her. Her clothes were disheveled, and she was completely unresponsive. Her breathing was terribly shallow, barely a whisper of air escaping her lips. But what made my blood run freezing cold were her arms. Under the harsh, bright bathroom light, I saw dark, violent, finger-shaped bruises wrapping completely around her pale skin. Someone had pinned her down with terrifying force. As a man who understands mechanics and leverage, I knew immediately that these were not marks from a simple fall. These were the undeniable marks of a brutal struggle. Before I could even reach out to check her pulse, I heard heavy, panicked footsteps rushing down the hallway. Derek lunged into the bedroom, panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically from the broken door to my face. He stood there in the doorway, wearing silk pajama bottoms and a cashmere sweater that was completely unwrinkled. For a man who was supposedly jolted awake by a home invasion, his hair was perfectly styled, and he was not out of breath from panic. He was panting from exertion. My eyes locked onto his, and in that split second, I saw a flash of raw, unfiltered guilt before he hurriedly plastered on a mask of shock. "Call an ambulance right now!" I roared, my voice shaking the expensive framed artwork on the walls. Derek took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Victor, please calm down. We do not need to involve emergency services. I am already handling this. I have my mother calling Dr. Harrison, our private family physician. He is discreet, and he knows how to handle these delicate family situations without making a public spectacle." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity of his words. My daughter was lying unconscious on the cold marble floor, her breathing dangerously shallow, her skin turning an unnatural shade of pale, and this polished coward was worried about a public spectacle. "She is not breathing right," I snarled, stepping over the ruined wood of the doorframe and closing the distance between us. "Call 911 or I swear to God, Derek, I will break your jaw." He held his ground, though his jaw tightened. "You are not thinking clearly, Victor. You do not understand what is happening here. Rachel is having a severe episode. If the authorities come, they will put her on an involuntary psychiatric hold. It will ruin her career. It will ruin our reputation. Dr. Harrison is on his way. Just step back and let us take care of my wife." He made the fatal mistake of reaching out to grab my shoulder. I did not argue anymore. 40 years of hauling steel beams and breaking concrete had given me a physical density that this soft manicured investment banker could not possibly match. I grabbed the front of his expensive cashmere sweater, twisted the fabric into my fist, and shoved him violently backward. Derek stumbled over the debris of the broken door and crashed hard against the hallway wall, gasping for air as the breath was knocked out of his lungs. "Do not ever touch me," I warned him in a low, deadly whisper. "And do not ever tell me how to take care of my own blood." I turned my back on him and knelt beside Rachel. Up close, the dark bruises on her arms looked even more horrifying. The distinct shape of fingers pressed deeply into her skin told a story of violence, of someone holding her down against her will. I carefully slid my arms beneath her knees and behind her back, lifting her from the floor. She was heartbreakingly light, completely limp in my embrace. As I held her against my chest, a sudden wave of memories washed over me. I remembered carrying her exactly like this, when she was a little girl fast asleep after a long day at the park, safe and protected in her father's arms. The contrast between that beautiful memory and this nightmare fueled a burning fire in my gut. I carried her out into the hallway. Evelyn was waiting at the top of the grand staircase, her face pale with fury. "You are making a terrible mistake, Victor," she hissed, her manicured fingers gripping the banister. "You are tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding." I did not waste a single breath responding to her. I carried Rachel down the stairs, out through the heavy front doors, and straight to my truck. I carefully laid her across the back seat, securing her with a seatbelt and wrapping my heavy winter coat around her shivering body. Just as I was about to climb into the driver's seat, Derek scrambled out of the house and threw himself into the passenger seat. "If you are taking her, I am coming with you," he demanded, his chest heaving. "I am her husband. I have the legal right to be there." I did not have the time to drag him out of the vehicle. Every second mattered. I slammed the door, started the engine, and tore down the winding driveway, leaving the iron gates of the Thorne estate far behind. The drive to City General Hospital was a tense, suffocating blur. I drove recklessly, breaking every speed limit, while Derek sat beside me in the dark, feverishly typing messages on his phone. When we finally screeched to a halt in front of the emergency room doors, I carried Rachel inside, shouting for help. A team of nurses rushed forward with a gurney, instantly taking over. But before I could even explain the situation, a tall man in a pristine white coat emerged from a side office. He walked with a familiar, arrogant stride. I noticed his name badge immediately. Dr. Harrison. He bypassed me entirely and walked straight to Derek. "Derek, your mother called me," the doctor said, his voice hushed and far too calm for a medical emergency. "I have a private trauma room ready. We will handle this quietly." I stepped forward, my hands clenched into tight fists. "I want a full blood panel done immediately," I stated, looking the doctor squarely in the eye. "I want to know exactly what is in her system, and I want an examination of the contusions on her arms." Dr. Harrison looked at me as if I were a piece of dirt he had just scraped off his shoe. "Mr. Caldwell, I assure you we provide the highest standard of care here. However, Derek is her legal next of kin. I will be discussing her treatment plan exclusively with him." He gestured to two large security guards who suddenly appeared behind him. "Please wait in the family area. You are not permitted in the trauma room." The guards stepped forward, forming a solid wall between my daughter and me. I knew that fighting them would only get me arrested, leaving Rachel entirely isolated with these people. I swallowed the bitter taste of bile in my throat and forced myself to step back, retreating to the sterile, brightly lit waiting area. Through a narrow glass panel down the hall, I could see the monitors flashing inside Rachel's room. I sat down on a hard plastic chair, leaning my elbows on my knees, and let my mind do what it had been trained to do for 4 decades. I analyzed the structure. When you spend your entire life building commercial high-rises, you develop a sixth sense for recognizing when a foundation is flawed. You learn to spot the tiny hairline fractures in a concrete slab that indicate an unstable base, You learn that when a steel beam buckles, it leaves a specific pattern of stress marks. Physical evidence never lies. People lie, but the structural damage always tells the exact truth of what happened. I closed my eyes and mentally reconstructed the bruises on Rachel's arms. The angle of the thumbprints, the deep purple contusions pressing into the soft tissue of her inner biceps. If she had fallen down the stairs, as Evelyn's blocked door and Derek's panic seemed to imply the impact, trauma would be random. There would be scrapes on her elbows, defensive bruising on her forearms from trying to catch her fall. But Rachel did not have random impact trauma. She had targeted pressure points. Someone had held her down by her arms with terrifying sustained force. The structural narrative they were trying to sell me was a complete fabrication. The foundation of their story was rotting from the inside out. An hour crawled by in agonizing silence. Finally, the heavy doors of the trauma unit pushed open, and Dr. Harrison walked toward the waiting area holding a silver metal clipboard. Derek stood up, instantly rubbing his eyes to produce a fresh layer of artificial tears. Dr. Harrison stopped in front of us, his expression molded into a mask of professional sympathy. Victor. He began using my first name with unwarranted familiarity. We have stabilized Rachel's vitals, but the situation is incredibly grave. He handed the clipboard not to me, but directly to Derek. I leaned over to read the bright red print on the top page. It was a rapid toxicology report. Rachel's blood contains a highly lethal combination of severe anxiety medications and a massive amount of alcohol, the doctor explained smoothly, locking his gaze onto Derek. Her system is completely overwhelmed. It is a miracle her heart did not simply stop. As soon as the words left the doctor's mouth, Derek collapsed into the nearest plastic chair. He buried his face deep in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently as he let out a loud theatrical sob that echoed off the linoleum walls. "I am so sorry," Derek wept, his voice cracking with rehearsed devastation. I knew she was stressed at the clinic, but I had no idea it was this bad. I tried to grab the pills from her. I tried to hold her down, but she fought me. I failed. I failed to stop her suicide attempt. I stood there in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of the hospital, the crisp white toxicology report still gripped tightly in my weathered hands. Derek's theatrical sobbing echoed against the pale linoleum floors. He buried his face deep in his expensive cashmere sleeves, acting the part of the devastated husband with sickening precision. I did not move to comfort him. I simply waited. After a few carefully timed moments, Derek wiped his face, taking a deep, shuddering breath, before looking up at me. His eyes were completely dry. "Victor." "I did not want to tell you this," Derek began, his voice dropping to a somber, conspiratorial whisper. "I wanted to protect her dignity. But Rachel has been spiraling out of control for months. The immense pressure at the pediatric clinic, losing those desperately sick children, it completely broke her. She started having severe panic attacks back in October. At first it was just trouble sleeping through the night. Then the situation escalated rapidly. She began drinking heavily in secret to numb the pain. She hid bottles of wine in the back of her closet, burying them underneath her winter sweaters where she thought I would never find them. I stared at him, my face a mask of impenetrable stone. I did not interrupt his performance. I let him build the framework of his elaborate lie. When you construct a building with cheap, substandard materials, you want the dishonest contractor to keep stacking the bricks until the entire structure collapses under its own fraudulent weight. I knew how to listen to the groans of failing steel. Derek gestured frantically toward the closed trauma room doors. Tonight, things reached an absolute boiling point. He continued, his tone pleading for my sympathy. She was completely incoherent, screaming wildly about how she could not take the pain anymore. She swallowed a massive handful of pills and washed them down with half a bottle of cheap Merlot. When I tried to intervene and stop her, she lost her mind. She ran straight toward the second-story window in our bedroom. She was actually trying to throw herself out onto the concrete. Victor. I had to tackle her to the floor to save her. I had to pin her down by her arms with all my body weight, just to keep her from killing herself. That is exactly where those bruises came from. I was only trying to save her life. Before I could dissect the gaping holes in his ridiculous fabricated story, the sharp rhythmic clicking of high heels announced the arrival of Evelyn Thorne. She glided down the hospital corridor, looking just as immaculate as she had standing at her front door. She carried a sleek designer handbag and wore an expression of profound, heavily manufactured tragedy. She walked right up to me, placing a perfectly manicured hand gently on my forearm. "Oh, Victor." Evelyn sighed, her voice dripping with thick, artificial pity. "This is a massive tragedy for all of us. We are simply heartbroken to see her this way. We have been trying so hard to get Rachel the psychiatric help she desperately needs, but addiction is a terrible, wicked disease. It turns the bright people we love into unrecognizable strangers." She elegantly unclasped her expensive leather handbag and reached inside. She pulled out a small orange plastic cylinder and pressed it firmly into my palm. I looked down at the object in my hand. It was a prescription pill bottle. The printed label clearly bore my daughter's name: Rachel Caldwell Thorne. Below her name, the prescribed medication was listed in bold, unapologetic black letters: Alprazolam, 2 milligrams. The prescription was dated exactly 3 weeks ago, signed by none other than Dr. Harrison himself. "I wanted to show you this so you would fully understand the grim reality of the situation," Evelyn murmured, stepping back to stand shoulder to shoulder with her son. "We did not want to worry you with her ongoing daily struggles. We know exactly how much you adore her, and we did not want you to judge your only daughter for her unfortunate weakness. She has been secretly self-medicating for several months now. Tonight was simply the inevitable, terrifying breaking point. We are just so incredibly thankful that Derek was there to stop her from doing the unthinkable and ending her own life." My calloused thumb traced the smooth plastic ridges of the pill bottle. Inside my mind, heavy gears were turning, locking firmly into place. The story they presented was exceptionally neat. It was incredibly tidy, wrapped up in a perfect little bow. A deeply stressed pediatric nurse turning to wine and prescription drugs to cope with the immense trauma of losing young patients. A loving, heroic husband stepping in at the last possible second to prevent a tragic, bloody suicide. It was the exact kind of dramatic narrative that high society families in the North Shore loved to whisper about at their lavish charity galas. It was a calculated story, designed entirely to generate profound pity for Derek and Evelyn, while simultaneously discrediting my daughter and labeling her as an unstable liability. I looked directly from Evelyn to Derek, my stony expression giving absolutely nothing away. I silently pocketed the pill bottle, securing it deep inside my jacket. If they wanted to play a dangerous game of documentation, I was going to hold on to every single piece of physical evidence they foolishly handed me. "I need to see her right now." I stated, my voice low, gravelly, and dangerously calm. "I need to speak to the attending physician about transferring her to a different medical facility for an unbiased second opinion." Derek's relaxed posture immediately stiffened into a rigid line. The pitiful mask of the weeping, traumatized husband vanished without a trace, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating demeanor of a ruthless corporate shark. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored blazer and pulled out a thick stack of neatly folded legal documents, heavily stamped with an official blue notary seal. "That will not be happening, Victor." Derek said, his tone turning as hard and unforgiving as poured concrete. "I am her legally wedded husband, and I currently hold her comprehensive medical proxy. I alone make all critical healthcare decisions on her behalf." He unfolded the crisp documents and shoved them aggressively toward my chest. I glanced down at the bold heading. It was a standard spousal proxy granting Derek absolute uncontested authority over Rachel's physical and psychiatric care. The shaky signature at the very bottom was unmistakably Rachel's. "Dr. Harrison and I have already thoroughly discussed the absolute best course of action for her long-term recovery." Derek continued stepping uncomfortably closer to me to assert his sudden dominance. Rachel requires intense, highly specialized psychiatric intervention immediately. This public hospital cannot possibly provide the high level of strict security she desperately needs right now. I have already arranged for a rapid private medical transport. She is being transferred to the exclusive Silver Pines Wellness Retreat tonight. You have absolutely no legal power to stop me from transferring my sick wife, and you know it. You are just completely powerless right now. The heavy legal papers in Derek's hand felt like a concrete wall slamming directly into my chest. My contractor instinct screamed at me to grab him by the throat, to tear those documents into pieces, and to physically drag my daughter out of that hospital. My muscles twitched, and the blood pounded in my ears with a deafening roar. I wanted to fight. I wanted to dismantle this smug, arrogant man standing in front of me. But then I looked past his tailored shoulder. I saw the two massive security guards shifting their weight, their hands resting near their radios. I saw Dr. Harrison glaring at me, his finger hovering over the hospital panic button. I realized instantly that if I threw a single punch right now, if I let my righteous anger win, I knew exactly what would happen. I would be arrested for assault. I would be handcuffed, dragged out of the emergency room, and thrown into a holding cell. And Rachel would be left completely alone, utterly defenseless against a husband and a mother-in-law who had just orchestrated her rapid disappearance. They wanted me to lose my temper. They were actively begging for me to cause a physical scene so they could validate their twisted narrative. They wanted to point at me and tell the police, "Look at the violent, unstable father." I took a deep, agonizing breath. I forced my clenched hands to open, stretching my stiff fingers out by my sides. I had to build a temporary bridge. I had to play a role I had never played in my entire 70 years of life. I had to be the defeated, oblivious, broken old man. I let my shoulders slump forward deliberately, dropping my posture to look smaller and frailer than I actually was. I let out a long, shaky sigh, letting my chin fall toward my chest. "You are right, Derek," I said, making my voice tremble just enough to sound thoroughly crushed. "You are her husband. You have the legal proxy. I am just a frightened father who panicked when he got that terrible phone call. I do not know anything about modern medicine or psychiatric treatments. I just saw my little girl on the floor, and I completely lost my mind." Derek relaxed instantly. The rigid defensive posture vanished, replaced by a sickeningly triumphant stance. He tucked the legal documents back into his expensive blazer, adjusting his lapels with a smooth, practiced motion. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable, Victor," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "This is a very complex medical situation. It requires a delicate, sophisticated touch, something you simply cannot provide." Evelyn stepped forward, a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her perfectly painted lips. She reached out and patted my shoulder, her touch feeling like absolute ice against my coat. "We know this is incredibly difficult for you to process, Victor," she cooed, her voice echoing in the sterile hallway. "But you have to understand, we are doing what is absolutely best for our family. Rachel is a thorn now. We protect our own. You just go home. Rest your tired old mind. Leave the heavy lifting to us." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes cast downward. "I will step back," I whispered, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. "I will let you handle her recovery. Just please keep me updated on her condition." "Of course we will," Derek lied smoothly. "The clinic will call you when she is stable enough to receive visitors, which might take a few weeks given her severe mental state." At that exact moment, the heavy double doors of the emergency room slid open. Two burly men wearing dark, unmarked paramedic uniforms walked in, pushing a specialized transport gurney. They did not look like standard hospital staff. They looked like private security contractors. Dr. Harrison met them halfway, speaking in low, hushed tones, before leading them directly into the trauma room. I stood frozen in the waiting area, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces as the men wheeled Rachel out. She was completely strapped down to the gurney, heavy leather restraints crisscrossing over her chest and legs. An oxygen mask covered her pale face, and an intravenous drip was taped to the back of her bruised hand. She looked so incredibly fragile, completely lost to the heavy sedatives pumping through her veins. Derek and Evelyn walked purposefully alongside the gurney, whispering instructions to the private transport team. They did not even glance back at me as they escorted my unconscious daughter out the sliding glass doors and into the freezing Chicago night. I watched through the window as they loaded her into a sleek black transport van. There were no flashing ambulance lights. There were no hospital logos. It was a phantom vehicle designed to make people disappear without a single trace. The doors slammed shut, the engine roared to life, and the van pulled away, vanishing into the cold darkness. I was completely alone in the sterile, silent hospital lobby. The victory they felt must have been intoxicating. They thought they had successfully outsmarted me. They thought they had removed the annoying blue-collar father from the equation. But they had made a monumental miscalculation. They forgot that I spent my entire career inspecting huge commercial structures for hidden flaws. They handed me a blueprint built entirely on lies, and now I was going to systematically tear it apart. I walked out to my truck, my boots crunching heavily against the frost-covered pavement. The drive back to my empty house was a blur of streetlights and shadows. The silence inside the cab of my truck was deafening, pressing against my eardrums. My mind was a whirlwind of terrifying images. The violent bruises on Rachel's arms, Evelyn's immaculate makeup at 3 a.m, Derek's dry, theatrical sobs, the swift, calculated arrival of the unmarked transport van. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale gray light over the quiet neighborhood. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the crushing silence of my home. The air felt incredibly heavy and suffocating. I walked directly into the kitchen, operating on pure mechanical autopilot. I filled the coffee pot with water, scooped the grounds into the filter, and hit the power button. The familiar rhythmic dripping of the machine was the only sound in the house. I leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, rubbing my tired eyes with the palms of my hands. My gaze drifted slowly across the room, eventually landing on the wooden mantel above the fireplace in the adjoining living room. Sitting right in the center was a framed photograph from Rachel's college graduation. She was standing between Sarah and me, beaming with absolute pride, wearing her crisp nursing uniform. I walked over to the mantel and picked up the heavy silver frame. I stared at her bright, intelligent eyes. I remembered the day she graduated. I remembered the celebratory dinner we had at an expensive Italian restaurant downtown. I remembered her laughing, raising her glass to make a toast. And then, like a massive steel beam crashing directly into my chest, a glaring discrepancy hit me. The impact of the realization was so incredibly violent that I actually stumbled backward, dropping the framed photograph onto the carpet. Derek had stood right there in the hospital hallway and told me a highly detailed story. He had looked me right in the eye and claimed that Rachel was hiding bottles of wine in her closet. He claimed she swallowed a handful of anxiety pills and washed them down with half a bottle of cheap Merlot to numb her depression. It was the core foundation of his entire suicide narrative. But Rachel is severely allergic to sulfites. The memory hit me with crystal clear precision. When she was 18 years old, she took a single sip of red wine at a family wedding. Within 10 minutes, her throat began to close. She broke out in terrible hives, and we had to rush her to the emergency room for an epinephrine injection. The doctors told her that consuming even a small glass of wine could trigger a fatal anaphylactic shock. Rachel knew this. She was a brilliant pediatric nurse who understood pharmacology better than anyone. She had not touched a single drop of wine in 14 long years. She would never, under any circumstances, drink half a bottle of Merlot. It would have killed her before the pills even reached her stomach. The story was a complete fabricated lie. The wine, the pills, the suicide attempt, the panic. It was all a carefully constructed stage play. And the bruises on her arms. They were not defensive marks from a husband trying to save his wife from a fall. They were restraint marks. They had held her down. They had physically forced those pills down her throat. My breathing grew ragged, my chest heaving as the horrifying truth locked firmly into place. My daughter did not have a psychotic break. She was attacked in her own home. She was poisoned by the very people who were supposed to protect her. And now they had locked her away in a secure facility where no one could hear her scream. I stood alone in my quiet living room, the early morning sunlight slowly creeping across the floorboards. The grief and confusion that had clouded my mind completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifying clarity. Derek and Evelyn Thorne thought they had won. They thought they had safely disposed of the problem. They thought I was just an ignorant, tired old man who would simply fade into the background. They were dead wrong. I am a builder, but I also know exactly how to tear things down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small orange pill bottle Evelyn had given me. I squeezed it tightly in my fist until the hard plastic cracked. They wanted a war in the shadows. They were going to get one. I walked toward the hallway closet to grab my heavy coat once again. I was not going to sit around and wait for updates. I was going to find out exactly why they were trying to murder my little girl. I shrugged my heavy winter coat onto my shoulders, but my hand paused on the brass doorknob. Rushing back out into the freezing night without a structural plan was a rookie mistake. A good contractor never starts swinging a sledgehammer until he reviews the blueprints. Derek and Evelyn were playing a high-stakes game insulated by their massive wealth and private security. If I charged the gates of that wellness retreat right now, they would have me arrested for trespassing, and I would lose my only chance to save my daughter. I needed leverage. I needed to understand the load-bearing walls of their deception. I turned away and walked down the shadowed hallway toward my private study. The cold room was lined with oak bookshelves and filing cabinets filled with decades of commercial construction permits. I moved directly to the corner of the room, kneeling on the worn rug. I pulled back a heavy wool runner to reveal a solid steel floor safe. I installed it myself 20 years ago, pouring the concrete casing perfectly so it could never be compromised. I spun the cold metal dial, the rhythmic metallic clicks grounding my racing thoughts. 34 to the right. 12 to the left, 58 to the right. The heavy locking bolts slid back with a satisfying, definitive thud. I reached deep into the dark cavity of the safe past old property deeds, retirement portfolios, and military discharge papers. My calloused fingers brushed against a thick, sealed manila envelope. I pulled it out and set it on the mahogany desk. My hands trembled slightly as I untied the string closure. Inside were the comprehensive financial documents my late wife Sarah had put together before the illness took her from us. Sarah was an incredibly wise woman. She inherited a substantial sum from her family money. She deliberately kept separate from my construction business. She always said that wealth could either be a stepping stone or a heavy anchor, depending entirely on the maturity of the person holding it. Before she passed, she established an ironclad trust fund for Rachel. It was heavily protected, overseen by a ruthless financial attorney named Mitchell, and it was designed with one very specific, unyielding condition. I spread the crisp, aged legal papers across the surface of my desk, running my index finger down the columns of dense legal jargon. I stopped at the final page, staring at the bold numbers near Sarah's elegant signature. The trust fund was originally seeded with $4 million. Over the last 10 years, through aggressive, highly secure market investments, that number had grown significantly. The current valuation of the trust sat at exactly $8 million. I moved my finger down to the access clause. Rachel was the sole beneficiary, but she could not touch a single penny of the principal capital until she reached full maturity. The trust was legally locked until her 32nd birthday. I looked up, staring blankly at the dark window across the study. My heart began to pound with a slow, terrifying rhythm. I calculated the exact dates. Rachel had celebrated her 32nd birthday exactly 14 days ago. The timing was not a coincidence. In the construction business, there are no coincidences. When a pipe bursts the exact same day, the water pressure is artificially increased. You know exactly who tampered with the valve. For 3 years, Derek had played the role of the devoted, supportive husband. He had never once displayed this level of erratic, controlling behavior. But now, exactly 2 weeks after my daughter suddenly gained access to $8 million in liquid, untraceable cash, she is mysteriously poisoned, bruised, and locked away in a private psychiatric facility where her husband holds absolute, uncontested legal authority over her life. Derek did not want to cure my daughter. He wanted to declare her mentally unfit. If Rachel was legally incapacitated, her husband, wielding his comprehensive medical proxy, could petition the courts for a financial conservatorship. He could seize control of the entire $8 million, claiming it was necessary to fund her long-term specialized psychiatric care. The pristine, plausible lie about her addiction was the exact foundation he needed to present to a judge. He was trying to steal her inheritance, and he was willing to medically torture her to get it. I slumped into my leather desk chair, the sheer breathtaking evil of their plan washing over me. I needed to warn Mitchell. I needed to freeze that trust immediately before Derek could file the conservatorship papers. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my cell phone. The bright screen illuminated the dark study. As I unlocked the device to search for Mitchell's contact information, a small, glaring red notification icon caught my eye. It was the voicemail indicator. The icon showed one unheard message. I frowned, tapping the screen. I am an old man, and I occasionally struggle with the interface of modern smartphones, often swiping away notifications by accident. I looked at the details of the missed message. It was from Rachel. The timestamp indicated it had been left 3 days ago, right in the middle of my busy Tuesday afternoon, when I was running loud power tools in my garage workshop. I had completely missed it. I pressed the phone tightly against my ear, my breath catching in my throat, as the automated voice announced the date and time. Then a sharp hiss of static filled the speaker, followed by Rachel's voice. She did not sound slurred or sedated like she had tonight. She sounded sharp, alert, and undeniably terrified. She was whispering rapidly, the sound of a locking door clicking shut in the background. "Dad, it is me," she whispered, her voice shaking with raw, unfiltered panic. "I really need you to call me back the absolute second you get this message. Do not text me. Call me." Something is terribly wrong with Derek. He has been locking himself in his home office for days, screaming at people on the phone about offshore margins and missing capital. I found some bank statements hidden in his briefcase. "Dad, I think he is completely bankrupt. He has been forging my signature on small loan applications." She paused, taking a ragged, trembling breath. I could hear the sheer terror vibrating through the tiny speaker. "He asked me to transfer my trust fund into a joint corporate account this morning. He said it was for a temporary investment, but his eyes were so cold. When I told him I needed to consult with Mitchell first, he completely lost his temper. He smashed a glass against the wall. I have never seen him like this. I told him I am going to call my lawyer and file for financial separation. I need you to find Mom's original death certificate and the primary trust documents in your safe. I need to prove the money is exclusively mine. Dad, please. I am scared to be in this house with him right now. Call me." The voicemail ended with a sharp beep. I slowly lowered the phone, placing it on top of the $8 million trust document. The entire puzzle was now assembled. Every single jagged piece fit perfectly together. Rachel had discovered Derek's financial ruin. She had refused to hand over her inheritance, and she had threatened him with a divorce. Derek was backed into a corner, facing absolute bankruptcy and the humiliating loss of his elite social status. He could not convince her to sign over the money willingly, so he and his ruthless mother had pivoted to their horrific contingency plan. They decided to silence her. They drugged her with sedatives, staged a suicidal breakdown, and shipped her off to a private facility to rot, paving the way for a hostile legal takeover of her entire estate. My daughter was a financial hostage. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the raw, violent anger inside me transforming into something entirely different. It became a cold, methodical, and calculating fury. I was not going to simply react. I was not going to play into their hands by throwing punches and getting myself arrested. That is what they wanted. They wanted the loud, ignorant contractor to make a scene. Instead, I was going to do what I had done my entire professional life. I was going to secure the perimeter, assemble my crew, and systematically demolish their lives. I was going to rip their pristine, wealthy facade down to the dirt, and I was going to extract my daughter from the wreckage. I picked up my phone and scrolled past Mitchell's name. I needed a lawyer, yes, but first I needed a demolition expert. I needed someone who knew how to operate in the shadows outside the polite, restrictive boundaries of the law. I dialed a number I had not called in over 5 years. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff, tired voice finally answered the line. "Leon, it is Victor," I said, keeping my voice steady in the dark study. "I need your help. I have a structural collapse on my hands, and I need a man who knows how to navigate the rubble." The gruff voice chuckled softly. "Tell me where and when, Victor." I told him we would meet later that evening, ending the call. Leon was a retired police detective turned private investigator. We worked together years ago when a corrupt supplier tried to scam my construction firm. He knew how to dig up dirt buried under corporate shell companies. But before I unleashed him on Derek and Evelyn, I needed to walk right into the belly of the beast and see the panic for myself. By 9 o'clock the next morning, I had pulled a thick folder of Rachel's childhood medical records from my filing cabinet. It was the perfect excuse for an unannounced visit. I drove downtown to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Derek's prestigious investment firm. The building was an architectural marvel designed to project an image of absolute transparency and immense wealth. I knew better. Buildings with the most glass usually had the darkest basements. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The reception area of Thorn Financial Investments was intimidating. The floors were polished marble, and the walls were paneled in rich walnut. A smartly dressed receptionist sat behind a massive desk. I approached her, letting my shoulders slump, playing the role of the exhausted, grieving father to perfection. "Excuse me, miss," I said, making my voice sound a bit raspy. "I am Victor Caldwell, Derek's father-in-law. I do not have an appointment, but I brought some urgent medical records for my daughter Rachel. Derek needs these for the clinic she was admitted to last night." The receptionist looked up, her expression softening into immediate sympathy. "Oh, Mr. Caldwell, I am so sorry to hear about your daughter. Mr. Thorne has been utterly devastated all morning. He instructed us to hold his calls, but since it is a medical emergency, I will let him know you are here. Please have a seat in the corridor outside his office suite. It is the last door on the right." She gestured toward a quiet hallway. I thanked her and walked slowly in the direction she pointed. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. As I approached the final mahogany door, I noticed it was left ajar by just a fraction of an inch. I stopped dead in my tracks. I did not sit in the waiting chairs. Instead, I stepped closer to the narrow crack, pressing my back flat against the wall, holding my breath. Inside the office, Derek was not weeping over his sick wife. He was screaming. "I do not care what you have to tell the auditors." Derek hissed, his voice trembling with violent, manic energy. "You move that capital by the end of the day. If those margin calls hit my desk tomorrow morning, we are completely finished. Do you understand me? You bury the deficit. You hide it under the shell accounts we set up in Delaware. Just buy me 72 hours. A loud smash echoed through the room like a paperweight shattering. "Do not tell me it is impossible," Derek roared, losing his polished composure entirely. "Foreclosure notices are already in my inbox. If the board finds out I have been leveraging client funds to cover my own catastrophic losses, I am going to federal prison. You stall them until Friday." My chest tightened. The words were a direct confirmation of Rachel's frantic voicemail. Derek had embezzled millions of dollars, and his entire life was crashing down. Then a second voice cut through the tension. It was sharp, venomous, and chillingly calm. It was Evelyn. "Get a hold of yourself, Derek," she snapped, her tone dripping with utter disdain. "Screaming at subordinates is not going to fix this. You are acting like a frightened child. We have an impenetrable plan, and you are going to ruin it with your panic. I peered through the opening. Evelyn was pacing across the extravagant office. She looked like a predator circling a cage. The money is there. Evelyn continued, her voice lowering to a commanding whisper. Rachel's trust fund is fully mature. $8 million in untraceable liquid assets. It is more than enough to cover the deficit, pay off the estate mortgage, and quiet the federal auditors before they open an investigation. All we need is for the judge to sign the conservatorship paperwork on Friday morning. I cannot take this waiting, Derek groaned, sounding like a man on the edge of a total psychological collapse. What if the clinic asks questions? What if her father starts digging around? Evelyn scoffed. Her father is an ignorant relic. He was practically crying in the hospital waiting room. He believes exactly what we told him. As for the clinic, I own a 40% stake in that facility. The staff there knows exactly who pays their lucrative salaries. They will not ask a single question. Just keep the girl sedated until Friday. Once the judge grants you absolute legal guardianship, we transfer the funds and we wash our hands of this mess. If her brain turns to mush from the sedatives, it only proves our tragic narrative. My blood turned to absolute ice. They were casually discussing the permanent destruction of my daughter's mind to cover their financial crimes. They were going to leave her an institutionalized vegetable. I felt explosive rage rising in my throat. I wanted to kick the mahogany door off its hinges and silence his pathetic voice forever. But violence would only forfeit the game. I needed to destroy them legally. Suddenly the leather chair squeaked. Footsteps marched toward the door. I quickly stepped back, dropping the manila folder onto the floor. The door swung wide open. Derek stood in the doorway, his face flushed red, sweating profusely. He froze the instant he saw me kneeling on the floor. Unadulterated terror flashed across his face. He stopped breathing, trying to calculate how much I had heard. I looked up at him, molding my expression into mild confusion and profound weariness. "Oh, Derek," I sighed, forcing my hands to tremble as I picked up the papers. "I am sorry. I did not mean to intrude." The receptionist told me to wait here, but my clumsy hands dropped the folder. I hope I did not interrupt a business call. Derek searched my weathered face for any sign of deception. Finding nothing but the broken facade of a grieving father, his panic dissolved. The arrogant mask slipped right back into place. He adjusted his tie and offered a fake smile. "Victor," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "You did not interrupt anything. Just standard routine market fluctuations. Come inside. Come." I stood up slowly, clutching the medical records. I played dumb, but the fire inside me was burning hotter than a furnace. I knew the truth. This was a financial hostage situation, and I needed professional backup to burn their entire empire to the ground. The old roadside diner smelled strongly of dark roasted coffee and greasy fried bacon. It was a loud, wonderfully chaotic place right off the busy interstate. I sat in a sticky vinyl booth in the far back corner, nursing black coffee. Across from me sat my friend Leon and attorney Mitchell. Leon had a gray mustache and eyes that constantly scanned the room, analyzing every patron. He spent 30 years as a police detective before opening a private firm. Next to him sat Mitchell, Sarah's financial attorney. Mitchell was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who navigated corporate finance with ruthless efficiency. I laid out the entire situation. I told them about the forged narrative, the sulfite allergy discrepancy, the fake suicide attempt, and the $8 million trust fund. I told them how I watched private security roll my sedated daughter into a phantom transport van. Mitchell stared at the table. "If Derek holds a medical proxy and your daughter signed it willingly, we are blocked on the legal front," Mitchell explained. "If we go to the police, Derek will simply wave that document in their faces. He will claim he is making medical decisions for a spouse suffering from addiction. The authorities will not intervene in a private medical dispute. The law perfectly protects him." Leon nodded. "Mitchell is right, Victor. If you force a wellness check, Derek's lawyers will slap you with a restraining order. They have placed Rachel inside a legal fortress. They can hold her in that facility, keep her medicated, and wait for Friday morning to finalize the financial conservatorship. We cannot hit them head on. We must slip through the cracks. I need you to freeze that trust, Mitchell, I said, leaning over the table. You need to put a lock on that money so tight that Derek cannot extract a single dime. I can file an injunction based on coercion, Mitchell replied. But I cannot do it until Friday morning when the courts open. If I tip our hand early, Derek's legal team will counter-file, dragging it out in litigation. We need proof of his financial distress to justify the freeze. That is where I come in, Leon said. I will dig into Derek's offshore accounts and corporate shell games. By Friday morning, I will have a report proving he is entirely bankrupt. But Victor, we have a massive problem. We do not know where they took Rachel. Silver Pines is a corporate umbrella owning a dozen private facilities across the state. We must find her physical location before Friday, or Derek might move her to keep her hidden. I looked at the two men risking their careers to help my family. You handle the money, I stated softly. I will find my daughter. But first I need to make them think they have completely won. I walked out of the warm diner and sat in the cold cab of my heavy truck. The freezing air stung my lungs. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Derek's personal number. I cleared my throat carefully, forcing my voice to drop an octave lower. I needed to sound frail, broken, and utterly defeated. Derek answered on the second ring. Victor, he said, his voice projecting a completely fake, incredibly soothing warmth. How are you holding up today on this terrible morning? I am not doing well, Derek, I rasped, letting a heavy, trembling sigh escape my lips. My arthritis is flaring up terribly from the cold, and my heart is completely broken. Sitting in this empty house looking at Rachel's photographs, it is driving me out of my mind. I cannot stop thinking about her lying in that hospital bed. I feel completely useless. I could practically hear the arrogant smirk forming on Derek's face. You have been through a massive shock, Victor. It is completely understandable that you feel overwhelmed. You need to focus on your own health right now. We have everything under control here. Rachel is receiving the best care possible. I know, I whispered, sounding thoroughly crushed. That is why I am calling. I cannot stay in this house right now. I need to get away from everything. I am packing my truck to head up to my old fishing cabin in northern Wisconsin. It is completely off the grid. No cell service, no internet. Just woods and quiet. I need to stay up there for at least a month to process this grief. I just wanted to let you know so you do not worry when my phone goes to voicemail. Derek could not hide the profound relief in his voice. He sounded like a man who had just won the lottery. I think that is a brilliant idea, Victor. You absolutely need to go off the grid and find your peace. Do not worry about a single thing down here. Take a full month. Take 2 months if you need it. I will handle the clinic and doctors. You just focus on resting your tired body. Safe travels, Victor. He ended the call quickly, eager to celebrate his perceived victory. He thought he had successfully neutralized the final threat. He thought I was driving 5 hours north to sit by a frozen lake and cry. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and started the engine. I did not drive north toward Wisconsin. Instead, I drove straight into the industrial district on the edge of the city. I stopped at a massive commercial hardware supply store, the kind of place that catered strictly to professional contractors. I moved through the aisles with cold mechanical efficiency. I purchased a cheap, untraceable prepaid burner phone paying with crisp $100 bills. I bought a high-definition fiber optic inspection camera with a 50-foot flexible cable typically used for examining compromised ventilation shafts. I picked up a set of directional parabolic microphones, heavy-duty wire cutters, lock-picking picks, and a tactical crowbar designed to pry open reinforced steel doors. I packed the gear into a black canvas duffel bag. I drove to the wealthy suburbs of the North Shore. Exactly 1 mile away from the towering iron gates of the Thorne family estate, there was a dilapidated roadside motel that had survived the gentrification of the area. The neon sign was missing half its letters. I walked into the dingy lobby and rented a room at the very back of the property, far away from the main road. I dropped my canvas bag onto the patterned bedspread. The room smelled intensely of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. I drew the thick blackout curtains tight, plunging the space into absolute darkness. I unpacked my tools, laying the fiber optic cables and microphones across the mattress in a neat, organized row. I picked up the burner phone and dialed Leon's secure number, giving him my new contact information. Derek and Evelyn thought they were dealing with an ignorant, grieving father who had simply surrendered and run away to hide in the woods. They had no idea they had just invited a master builder into their walls. The masks had slipped and the hunt had officially begun. I waited in the suffocating darkness of my motel room until the digital clock on the nightstand flashed 8. Derek and Evelyn were attending the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala tonight. It was a highly publicized black tie affair. They would be smiling for the cameras, shaking hands with wealthy donors, and playing the role of the exhausted, grieving family members, coping with my daughter's sudden, tragic breakdown. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but their arrogance gave me the exact window of opportunity I needed. I dressed in dark, tactical clothing and pulled a black knit cap low over my forehead. I slung the canvas duffel bag across my chest and slipped quietly out the back door of the motel. I did not take my truck. I walked the mile to the Thorne estate, sticking strictly to the heavy tree line that bordered the wealthy neighborhood. The freezing wind bit at my face, but the cold kept my mind razor sharp. I reached the towering iron gates and bypassed them entirely, moving to the eastern perimeter wall. I knew this property inside and out. 5 years ago, when Rachel and Derek first bought the estate, I had personally overseen the massive renovation project. I had upgraded the structural supports, reinforced the foundation, and most importantly, I had supervised the installation of their state-of-the-art security system. I knew every blind spot, every motion sensor, and every hardwired failsafe. I climbed the stone wall and dropped silently onto the frost-covered grass. The house stood before me like a dark, looming fortress. I moved quickly to the utility access panel hidden behind a row of thick, evergreen bushes. With practiced precision, I pulled a pair of insulated wire cutters from my bag and severed the primary fiber optic line feeding the exterior alarm perimeter. The system was designed to instantly roll over to a cellular backup, but I had brought a localized signal jammer. I flipped the switch on the small black box in my pocket. The digital keypad on the back door flashed a bright, angry red for 3 seconds before dying completely. The house was now blind and deaf. I used my tactical crowbar to pop the lock on the heavy oak door, applying just enough precise upward pressure to bypass the deadbolt without leaving a scratch on the brass casing. I stepped inside the kitchen, closing the door behind me with a soft click. The silence in the massive house was absolute. I did not turn on my flashlight. I relied entirely on the ambient moonlight, filtering through the tall glass windows and the architectural blueprints permanently etched into my memory. I moved through the lavish rooms with the silent, deliberate grace of a ghost. I was not here to break things or throw a violent tantrum. I was here to harvest data. I made my way to Evelyn's private parlor first. It was an opulent room decorated with expensive silk curtains and antique furniture. I placed my bag on the floor and pulled out the first micro camera. It was no larger than a button equipped with infrared night vision and a massive battery reserve. I climbed onto a sturdy velvet chair and carefully unscrewed the metal grating of the HVAC vent near the ceiling. I planted the tiny lens inside the ductwork, angling it perfectly to capture the entire room. I screwed the grate back into place, wiping away my fingerprints with a microfiber cloth. Evelyn would never think to look in the vents. Next, I moved silently down the hallway to Derek's home office. This was the true belly of the beast. The room smelled of expensive cologne and aged leather. I repeated the process, sliding a second micro camera into the ceiling vent directly above his massive mahogany desk. Now I would see every document he signed and hear every phone call he made. But audio and video were only half the battle. I needed hard, undeniable financial evidence to prove to a judge that Derek was entirely bankrupt and unfit to control my daughter's wealth. I stepped down from the vent and moved behind his desk. Derek was arrogant, but he was not stupid. His high-end desktop computer was locked down with complex biometric passwords. However, I did not need to log into his operating system to steal his secrets. I unzipped my bag and pulled out a specialized industrial USB cloning drive. Leon had given it to me, explaining that it was designed to bypass the software entirely and mirror the raw data directly from the hard drive motherboard. I plugged the device into the hidden port at the back of the computer tower. A small, pulsing blue light illuminated the dark corner of the office. The digital display on the cloner indicated that the extraction process would take exactly 4 minutes. I stood in the darkness, watching the progress bar crawl across the tiny screen. 10%. 20%. The silence was deafening. Every creak of the old house settling sounded like a gunshot in my ears. I kept my eyes locked on the light, counting the seconds in my head. 50%. 70%. I was almost there. I was moments away from possessing the financial blueprints that would completely dismantle Derek's pristine lies. 90%. The device whirred softly. Then a metallic click echoed loudly through the silent house. It came from the front foyer. The deadbolt was turning. My blood ran cold. I glanced at my watch. It was only 9:30. Derek and Evelyn were not supposed to be home until midnight. A female voice sighed heavily in the hallway. It was Evelyn. She had returned early from the gala, likely bored. The front door swung open, and the clicking of her heels began echoing against the marble floors, moving steadily toward the home office. 98%. I watched the cloning device, my chest tight with panic. I could not pull the drive early, or the data would corrupt, rendering the mission a failure. The footsteps grew loud. She was in the adjoining hallway just a few feet away. 100%. The small screen flashed a bright green. I ripped the USB drive out of the computer, shoved it into my pocket, and grabbed my duffel bag. I could not go back out through the kitchen. Evelyn was already blocking the primary escape route. I looked at the large glass windows behind Derek's desk. Outside, a heavy network of industrial steel scaffolding was erected against the back of the house for a roof repair project. I quietly unlatched the brass window lock and slid the glass pane up just as the doorknob to the office began to turn. I slipped backward out the window onto the steel platform. I pulled the glass shut behind me, leaving it open by a fraction of an inch, just as Evelyn flipped on the overhead lights. I dropped flat against the metal grating of the scaffolding, holding my breath as her shadow moved across the curtains. I had the stolen data, the hidden cameras were invisible, and their arrogant masks were about to be permanently shattered. I pressed my body flat against the freezing metal scaffolding, holding my breath as Evelyn moved inside. Through the gap in the window, I watched her shadow stretch across the curtains. She paced back and forth, muttering angrily about Derek and his lack of composure, oblivious that I was hovering mere inches away. I waited until she finally turned off the lights, and her footsteps retreated down the long hallway. Once the heavy mahogany door clicked shut, I began my descent. Climbing down 3 stories of steel scaffolding in the pitch-black night was daunting, but my hands remembered the rhythm. I slipped down into the garden, vanished into the tree line, and walked back to my motel room. The stolen data drive felt like a burning coal in my pocket. I plugged it into a laptop, verifying the files were intact, and sent the raw data straight to Mitchell. The financial trap was set. Now I needed to focus on extracting my daughter from their medical prison. The next morning I met Leon in the corner of a diner situated 3 towns over from the Thorne estate. Leon slid into the booth, pulling a thick folder from his leather jacket. His weathered face was grim lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. He spent the night running surveillance on the Silver Pines Wellness Retreat, and his report confirmed my worst fears. It is a genuine fortress, Victor Leon explained, keeping his voice low. It sits on 40 acres of private woodland, surrounded by 12-foot masonry walls topped with motion sensors. The front gate is manned by armed guards, and every entrance requires a biometric keycard. It is designed exactly like a high-end prison. They do not want anyone getting in, and they do not want anyone getting out. Mitchell arrived a few minutes later, sliding into the booth. He slapped a stack of printed financial records onto the table. "It is much worse than a medical facility," Mitchell stated, pointing a finger at the highlighted text. "I stayed up all night tracking the corporate ownership of Silver Pines. It is buried under 3 Delaware shell companies, but I found the primary shareholder. Evelyn Thorne owns a 40% controlling stake in the entire operation." My stomach turned to lead as the magnitude of their deception settled over me. Evelyn was not simply sending Rachel to a random clinic for help. She was locking her inside her own private black site. It was an exclusive dumping ground where wealthy families sent inconvenient relatives to disappear without public scandal. With her 40% ownership, Evelyn dictated exactly who was hired, what medications were administered, and who was allowed to visit. She completely controlled the narrative. I pulled a worn notebook from my pocket, my mind shifting from anger to structural analysis. If a building is impenetrable from the front, you do not attack the gate. You look for the foundational weaknesses. I spent 40 years pulling commercial permits and reviewing municipal zoning layouts. I knew exactly how to find the blind spots in any architectural design. I drove to the county records office under the guise of an independent contractor, looking up property lines. Within 2 hours, I had a complete set of the blueprints for the Silver Pines facility. I spread the blue sheets of paper across the bed in my motel room, tracing the intricate web of hallways, checkpoints, and utility shafts. I found the flaw almost immediately. The clinic had recently upgraded their entire digital security perimeter, but they neglected to modify the original subterranean service entrance used for industrial laundry. The heavy steel door was located in a sunken stairwell obscured by a retaining wall, placing it exactly 3 degrees outside the sweeping arc of the nearest security camera. It was a microscopic blind spot, but for a man who knew how to measure fractions of an inch, it was a massive open door. However, slipping inside was only half the battle. I needed an inside operative to reach Rachel. Leon tapped into his extensive network of local informants and quickly identified our weak link. Her name was Brenda. She was a heavily indebted night shift nurse working the psychiatric ward at Silver Pines. She was facing overdue medical bills for her sick mother, harboring a deep resentment toward the wealthy clinic administrators. Leon intercepted Brenda in the dimly lit parking lot of a discount grocery store late that evening. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He handed her a thick, brown envelope containing exactly $10,000 in unmarked $100 bills. The instructions were incredibly simple, yet exceptionally dangerous. She was to smuggle a clean, uncompromised blood sample from my daughter before the clinic doctors could contaminate her system further. More importantly, she was to sneak an untraceable burner phone into Rachel's guarded room and conceal it inside the mattress lining. The phone was pre-programmed with only my secure number. If Rachel woke up, she would have a direct, invisible lifeline to the outside world. Brenda looked at the massive stack of cash in pure shock before silently nodding her agreement. The waiting was absolute torture. I sat in the darkness of my motel room, staring relentlessly at the glowing screen of my prepaid phone. Every passing minute felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I visualized the dark hallways of the clinic, imagining Brenda creeping past the security stations with the hidden device. Just past 3 in the morning, the phone vibrated against the cheap wooden nightstand. A single encrypted text message appeared on the screen. It was an image file. I opened the message, my breath catching painfully in my throat. The poorly lit photograph showed the sterile, fortified interior of a psychiatric isolation room. In the center of the frame, my beautiful daughter lay trapped on a narrow hospital bed. Thick leather restraints bound her wrists and ankles tight against the metal rails. Her skin was a horrifying, translucent shade of gray, making her look like a ghost fading into the mattress. Her eyes were rolled back, lost to the massive doses of heavy sedatives they pumped into her veins to keep her compliant. The deep purple bruises Derek inflicted on her arms were visible under the harsh fluorescent lights. I stared at the image of my incapacitated child. The role of the defeated old man completely burned away, leaving nothing but cold, terrifying ash. A profound, lethal silence settled over my mind. I did not yell. I did not break anything. The sorrow was gone, replaced by a ruthless, mechanical fury that felt heavier than poured concrete. Derek and Evelyn Thorne thought they had won their sophisticated game of chess. They believed they could lock my daughter in a cage and steal her life without facing any consequences. I closed the phone and picked up my tactical crowbar, feeling the cold weight of the steel in my hands. The time for gathering evidence was rapidly coming to an end. They had built a massive fraudulent empire on the broken back of my only child, and I was going to systematically reduce it to absolute rubble. I left the suffocating confines of my motel room before the sun even crested the horizon. I carried my duffel bag and the cloned USB drive straight to an abandoned warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. Leon had commandeered the empty office space on the second floor, transforming it into a secure, off-the-grid command center. When I pushed open the heavy metal door, the room was dimly lit by the harsh glow of several computer monitors. Mitchell was already there, sitting beside Leon, with his sleeves rolled up to his elbows and his expensive silk tie loosened around his neck. They looked like two generals preparing for a siege. I tossed the USB drive onto the folding table. The metallic clatter echoed in the cavernous room. "I need you to tear this apart," I said. Leon snatched the drive and plugged it into a heavily encrypted laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard, typing lines of complex code to bypass the residual security firewalls Derek had installed. The room fell into a tense, heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of the keys and the low hum of the computer processor. We watched the decryption software slowly chew through the stolen data. It took nearly an hour of agonizing waiting before the progress bar finally hit 100%. The screen flashed bright green, and a massive directory of hidden folders flooded the display. Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he clicked through the primary financial ledgers. He was a shark smelling blood in the water, and Derek had left an absolute ocean of it. Mitchell opened a master spreadsheet, his face growing paler with every line of data he scrolled past. The numbers did not make any sense at first glance, but Mitchell knew exactly how to translate the corporate deception. "This is not an investment firm," Mitchell whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of professional awe and profound disgust. "This is a massive, highly orchestrated Ponzi scheme. Derek has not been a successful banker for over 4 years. He has been actively cannibalizing his own clients." Mitchell pointed a shaking finger at a column of red numbers hidden deep within a nested folder labeled as offshore holding accounts. Derek had systematically embezzled over $12 million from his top-tier investors. He had been skimming huge percentages off the top of their portfolios, moving the stolen capital through a dozen untraceable shell companies in the Cayman Islands to fund his lavish, unsustainable lifestyle. But the house of cards was finally collapsing. Mitchell pulled up a series of highly classified internal memos. They were frantic, desperate emails between Derek and his chief financial officer. The Securities and Exchange Commission had flagged several massive discrepancies in his quarterly filings. Worse still, a specialized task force from the Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially requested a comprehensive audit of Thorne Financial Investments. The federal agents were already circling his firm like vultures. The net was closing in rapidly. I stared at the glowing screen, the structural blueprints of Derek's lies, becoming completely transparent. The Thornes were not just facing a corporate scandal. They were facing absolute catastrophic ruin. Leon opened another directory labeled Personal Estate. The files inside documented the brutal reality of their private finances. The immaculate, sprawling mansion in the North Shore, the luxury imported vehicles, the expensive charity galas, it was all a meticulously crafted illusion. The estate was heavily mortgaged, and they had not made a single payment in 7 months. A final notice of foreclosure had been issued just 3 weeks ago. Their private bank accounts were completely overdrawn. They had maxed out every line of available credit. Derek and Evelyn were entirely bankrupt. They did not have enough liquid cash to pay their utility bills, let alone fend off a massive federal indictment and repay $12 million in stolen client funds. There is only one clean, untraceable asset left in their entire orbit, Mitchell stated, pulling up the trust fund documents Sarah had created. It is Rachel's $8 million inheritance. It matured exactly 14 days ago, but there is a massive legal roadblock for them. Sarah designed this trust to be completely bulletproof. Derek cannot just transfer the funds into a joint account. The bank requires Rachel's physical signature verified by a public notary to authorize the release of the principal capital. Without her explicit willing consent, Derek cannot touch a single dime of that money. The horrifying mechanics of the trap were now fully illuminated. Derek was drowning in criminal debt. He demanded the money. Rachel refused and threatened to expose him, so he and his mother pivoted to a sinister contingency plan. They poisoned her, labeled her as a suicidal addict, and locked her in a private medical fortress controlled by Evelyn. They were keeping my daughter heavily sedated, while Derek used his medical proxy to file for a hostile financial conservatorship. Once a judge declared Rachel mentally incompetent to manage her own affairs, Derek would be granted absolute legal control over her estate. He could bypass the signature requirement, drain the $8 million, pay off his most dangerous creditors, and silence the federal auditors before the FBI knocked on his door. My daughter was the only thing standing between Derek Thorne and a federal prison cell. Leon suddenly held up his hand, signaling us to stop talking. He was digging through a hidden partition on the hard drive, a secure folder disguised as temporary system files. "Look at this," Leon muttered, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. Derek uses a voice-activated dictation software for his private memos. The program automatically records background audio and saves the cached files locally on the hard drive before transferring them to the cloud. I just found an audio file that was hidden and marked for permanent deletion. The timestamp on the recording is from 3 days ago, exactly 20 minutes before you received that panicked voicemail from Rachel. Leon amplified the computer speakers and clicked play on the recovered file. A harsh static hiss filled the warehouse, followed immediately by the sound of glass shattering against a hardwood floor. "I am not signing anything!" Derek, Rachel screamed. Her voice echoed through the speakers, fierce and unyielding. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone. I saw the offshore statements. I know exactly what you did to those clients. You stole millions of dollars, and you expect me to drain my mother's trust fund to save you from federal prison." Derek's voice responded, cold, venomous, and dripping with manic desperation. "You do not understand how this works, Rachel. If I go down, this entire family goes down. The estate will be seized. We will lose absolutely everything. You are my wife. You are legally obligated to help me fix this deficit before the auditors arrive on Monday morning. I am not helping you cover up a federal crime." Rachel fired back, her tone trembling with absolute resolve. "I am calling Mitchell first thing in the morning to freeze my accounts. And then I am calling my father. I am filing for divorce, Derek. I am leaving this house and I am taking my life back. You and your mother are completely insane." A sudden violent scuffle erupted on the audio recording. The sickening sound of a heavy body being shoved against a wall echoed through the room. Rachel let out a sharp, terrified gasp. "You are not going anywhere, Rachel!" Derek snarled, his voice dropping into a dark, lethal whisper. "You are going to sit down and you are going to sign the authorization forms, or I swear to God I will make sure you never leave this house." The recording abruptly cut off, leaving a ringing silence in the cold warehouse. I stood frozen, staring blindly at the computer screen. The phantom echo of my daughter's terrified voice ripped through my chest like a jagged blade. She had stood her ground. She had fought back against his manipulation. She had bravely threatened to expose his entire criminal empire, and in response he had violently assaulted her in their own home. He had pinned her against the wall, leaving those horrifying bruises on her arms. When she managed to lock herself in the bedroom and call me for help, I had failed to answer the phone. I had been safely out in my garage, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding across the city. Derek knew he could not force her to sign the papers, so he initiated the overdose. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer just a financial theory. They were the blueprints of an attempted murder. Derek and Evelyn had systematically planned to erase my daughter's mind for $8 million. I slowly reached down and picked up my tactical crowbar from the folding table. The heavy forged steel felt cold and solid in my grip. I turned toward the warehouse door, my jaw set like stone. I had all the evidence I needed to destroy their wealth. Now it was time to tear down the walls of their fortress and bring my little girl home. I left the cold, abandoned warehouse with Leon and Mitchell already preparing the final financial injunctions. The long drive back to my dim motel room felt incredibly different this time. The crushing, suffocating weight of the unknown was completely gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. I had the financial blueprints secured, but the crucial piece of my plan was playing out in real time. I unlocked the cheap veneer door of my motel room, stepped inside, and immediately locked the deadbolt right behind me. The heavy blackout curtains kept the space buried in shadows, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of my laptop screen, resting on the scratched wooden desk. I pulled out the secondary receiver Aisha had given me and connected it to the computer. The software hummed to life, searching for the encrypted signals broadcasting from the micro-cameras I had planted inside the Thorne estate. For a few tense moments, there was only static. Then the screen flickered, split into two separate video feeds, and crystallized into high-definition clarity. The first feed showed Evelyn's opulent parlor entirely empty and bathed in moonlight. The second feed, however, was a direct top-down view of Derek's mahogany-paneled home office. The camera hidden in the ceiling vent provided a flawless, unobstructed view of the room. Derek and his mother were sitting across from each other in the expensive leather armchairs I had seen just hours earlier. A heavy crystal decanter of amber scotch rested on the low table between them. Derek leaned forward, pouring a generous measure of the liquor into two heavy crystal glasses. He handed one to Evelyn, his posture completely relaxed, his shoulders loose. The frantic, sweating, panicked man I had witnessed earlier was entirely gone. In his place sat a smug, triumphant predator who believed he had successfully manipulated his way out of total annihilation. Evelyn took the glass, swirling the dark liquid thoughtfully, before taking a slow, refined sip. She was wearing a deep emerald silk robe, looking absolutely serene, as if she had not just orchestrated the brutal medical imprisonment of her own daughter-in-law. I put on my headphones, pressing the foam tightly against my ears. The parabolic microphones picked up the crisp clinking of ice against crystal and the soft, steady hum of the central heating system. I held my breath, waiting for the structural cracks to reveal themselves. "We handled the hospital staff perfectly," Evelyn stated, her voice smooth and chillingly conversational. "Dr. Harrison is entirely in our pocket. He filed the rapid toxicology report exactly as I instructed, emphasizing the dangerous mixture of anxiety medication and alcohol. He completely bypassed the standard sulfite allergy protocol, classifying her airway restriction as a severe panic response rather than anaphylaxis. The narrative is utterly flawless, Derek." Derek chuckled, a low, arrogant sound that made the muscles in my jaw tighten until my teeth ached. He took a long drink of his scotch, sinking deeper into the plush leather chair. "I have to admit, Mother, I was terrified when she found those offshore banking statements. When she threatened to call Mitchell and lock down her trust fund, I thought we were completely finished. The federal auditors are breathing down my neck. If she had filed for divorce and walked out that door with her $8 million, the entire firm would have imploded by Monday." Evelyn waved a dismissive, elegant hand, placing her glass on the table. "You panic far too easily, Derek. You always have. When a structural liability threatens the foundation of our family, we do not panic. We neutralize it. Rachel was a liability. She thought her little nursing degree and her inherited money gave her power over us. We simply reminded her who actually controls this environment." I sat rigidly in my motel room, my hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard My knuckles turned white. The sheer casual cruelty in her voice was nauseating. They were discussing my daughter as if she were a defective piece of machinery they had casually discarded. Derek swirled his drink, staring into the amber depths. "I still cannot believe how incredibly hard she fought us," he muttered, shaking his head. When I backed her into the corner of the bedroom and showed her the crushed pills dissolved in the wine, she looked at me like I was a monster. Evelyn scoffed loudly, a harsh, ugly sound that destroyed her refined facade. She fought like a stray dog. Evelyn sneered, her voice dropping into a hateful, venomous register. It was pathetic. When I grabbed her by the arms and pinned her down against the hardwood floor, she was thrashing and screaming for you to stop. She was begging, but I held her wrists tight. I dug my fingers into her arms until she could not move a single muscle. "You have to be firm with feral things, Derek. You have to break their spirit before you can leash them." I held her perfectly still while you forced the glass against her mouth and poured that mixture down her throat. The air vanished from my lungs. A violent, sickening shudder violently ripped through my entire body. I was listening to a mother calmly describe how she physically restrained my child while her son poured poison down her throat. The bruises, the dark, terrifying fingerprints pressed deep into Rachel's pale skin. It was Evelyn. Evelyn had pinned her down. Evelyn had watched my daughter choke on the sulfites she was deathly allergic to, holding her down while she struggled for breath. We had to make sure she swallowed enough to justify the psychiatric hold. Evelyn continued smoothing a wrinkle from her silk robe. If we had simply called the police and claimed she was unstable, she would have denied it. She would have told them about your embezzlement. We needed her completely incoherent, violently ill, and demonstrably suicidal. By forcing the overdose, we discredited her entirely. We created the perfect, undeniable physical evidence of a severe mental breakdown. Derek nodded in vigorous agreement. And the brilliant part is that her beloved father bought the performance hook, line, and sinker. Victor was standing right there in the hospital corridor, looking like a pathetic, beaten dog. I handed him the legal proxy, and he just completely folded. He packed up his truck and ran away to Wisconsin to cry in a cabin. He will not be anywhere near the city to interfere. Evelyn smiled, raising her glass. We erased her voice, Derek. A suicidal, addicted wife locked in a secure psychiatric ward has absolutely no credibility. Even if she wakes up and tries to tell the nurses about your missing millions, it will be instantly documented as a paranoid delusion caused by her chemical dependency. We own her narrative. We own her medical care. And most importantly, we own her estate. Derek checked his heavy gold wristwatch, the metal gleaming under the office lights. The paperwork is ready. Once the judge signs it on Friday, we pull the plug on her trust, and the clinic keeps her a vegetable for the next 10 years. No one will ever believe a junkie. The echo of Derek's final chilling sentence hung in the heavy, stagnant air of the motel room. The absolute cruelty of it suffocated me. I stared at the glowing computer monitor, the blue light casting long, harsh shadows across the scarred wooden desk. The mechanical fury that had ignited inside me earlier was no longer just a burning ember. It had forged itself into something much denser, something entirely absolute and unbreakable. I reached out with a steady hand and pressed a single key, stopping the recording. The silence that rushed back into the room was absolute, but my mind was moving at blinding speed. I had the confession. I had the brutal, undeniable truth of what they had done to my only child. The truth was a weapon, yes, but it was currently sheathed. If I moved too recklessly, if I allowed my anger to dictate my actions, Derek would simply slip through my fingers like water. I needed professional, surgical precision to trap him. But possessing the truth and weaponizing it were two completely different things in the eyes of the law. I needed Mitchell. I picked up the burner phone, dialed his direct line, and told him to get to the warehouse command center immediately. I packed the laptop, the hard drive, and the audio files into my canvas duffel bag, leaving the surveillance equipment running. I drove back to the industrial district, the dark, empty streets flashing past my windshield like a blurred nightmare. When I pushed open the heavy metal door of the second-floor office, Leon and Mitchell were already waiting. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I plugged the laptop into the main monitor and played the audio file. I watched the color rapidly drain from Mitchell's face as Evelyn described holding my daughter down. I watched Leon's jaw tighten, his hands curling into tight fists upon the folding table. When the recording finally clicked off, neither man spoke for a long time. The sheer calculated malice of the Thorne family had completely paralyzed the room. Mitchell slowly took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a trembling hand. Victor Mitchell began, his voice unusually quiet, stripped of his typical courtroom confidence. This changes the entire landscape, but it also accelerates their timeline drastically. If Derek has already filed the paperwork, we are running out of time. Mitchell opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal precedents. He explained the grim, terrifying reality of the legal maneuver Derek was executing. It is called an emergency ex parte conservatorship, Mitchell stated, leaning heavily against the table. It is a legal provision originally designed to protect vulnerable individuals who present an immediate danger to themselves. Derek has weaponized it perfectly. He is bypassing standard notification periods by claiming Rachel's fake suicide attempt constitutes a severe life-threatening medical crisis. Mitchell spread the documents across the table, tapping his gold pen against the dense legal text. Derek has submitted the completely falsified medical records from the emergency room. He has the rapidly processed toxicology report showing the lethal mixture of sedatives and alcohol. And most damaging of all, he has the sworn documented testimony of Dr. Harrison, the corrupt emergency room physician Evelyn paid off. That doctor has legally certified that Rachel suffers from profound psychiatric instability and severe chemical dependency. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Friday, at exactly 9. It will be held behind closed doors in a private judicial chamber to protect the privacy of the patient. If the judge bangs that gavel and signs that specific order, Derek will instantly be granted absolute, irrevocable legal control over Rachel's entire existence. I felt a cold, paralyzing dread creeping up my spine. "What exactly does absolute control mean, Mitchell?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "It means you cease to exist as her father in the eyes of the law," Mitchell replied, looking me directly in the eyes. "Derek will have the legal authority to dictate her medical treatment, which means he can keep her permanently committed and heavily sedated in Evelyn's black site clinic. He will control who is allowed to visit her, which means he will legally ban you from ever stepping foot inside that facility. You will never be allowed to see your daughter again. And financially, he will gain total access to her $8 million trust fund. He will drain every single penny by Monday afternoon, wire the stolen funds to his offshore creditors, and completely cover up his massive $12 million embezzlement. He will walk away a free, wealthy man, and Rachel will be trapped in a chemical prison for the rest of her natural life." The staggering weight of Mitchell's words hung heavily over the dimly lit warehouse. Leon watched me carefully, his posture tense, clearly expecting a violent explosion. He expected me to shatter the computer screen, to flip the heavy metal table, or to roar in blind, helpless agony. I did not yell. I did not smash a single thing in that room. The profound, freezing rage inside my chest simply crystallized into pure, tactical execution. I stood up slowly. I reached for my dark canvas jacket draped over the back of the folding chair and calmly slid my arms into the sleeves. I buttoned it with deliberate, methodical precision. "Leon," I said, my voice completely devoid of any frantic emotion, "I need you to reach out to your federal contacts right now. You mentioned that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had a specialized financial crimes division circling Derek's firm. I want you to call the highest-ranking agent you know on that task force. You are going to use the cloned hard drive data as bait. You tell them you have absolute, undeniable proof of a $12 million corporate embezzlement scheme complete with offshore routing numbers and internal communications. You tell them the entire structure is completely collapsing and the primary suspect is a massive flight risk. But you do not give them the files yet. You tell them they have to meet us tomorrow morning at the county courthouse if they want the entire package handed to them on a silver platter. Leon slowly smiled, a dark, predatory gleam appearing in his weathered eyes. He pulled his phone from his leather jacket, already scrolling through his encrypted contact list. Consider it done, Victor. They will bring an entire tactical team for a bust of this magnitude. I turned back to face Mitchell. Mitchell, you are going to draft a counter-petition for immediate medical emancipation, incorporating the audio confession and the structural proof of Evelyn's shadow ownership of the psychiatric clinic. We are going to walk right into that private closed-door judicial chamber tomorrow morning at exactly 9. We are not going to stop the hearing. We are going to let Derek build his perfect little legal fortress right in front of the judge. We will let him present his fake medical records. We will let him tell his tragic, heartbreaking lies. And then we are going to lock the doors from the inside, and we are going to absolutely annihilate him. We spent the rest of Thursday night transforming the abandoned industrial warehouse into a highly synchronized tactical command center. The air was thick with the smell of bitter black coffee and the electric hum of powerful processors working at their absolute maximum limits. I watched Mitchell pace relentlessly across the concrete floor, organizing the printed documents into distinct, lethal legal categories. He was meticulously preparing the counter-petition, linking Derek's fraudulent emergency room charts with Evelyn's hidden corporate ownership records. Leon remained glued to his encrypted monitor, managing the digital back channels and communicating directly with his federal contacts. We were not merely building a defense for a conservatorship hearing. We were carefully constructing a federal RICO case, laying out the explosive charges with the structural precision of a controlled demolition. Every piece of evidence had to interlock flawlessly. If we left a single legal loophole, Derek's highly paid attorneys would slither right through it. But the foundation of our entire counterattack rested entirely on the physical evidence Brenda was actively risking her life to secure. At exactly 2 in the morning, the heavy metal door of the warehouse groaned open. Leon's private courier stepped into the harsh fluorescent light, clutching a small, insulated biometric transport cooler. He had just returned from a covert rendezvous with Brenda in a desolate commuter parking lot 3 miles outside the perimeter of the Silver Pines Wellness Retreat. Mitchell snatched the cooler and popped the magnetic seals. Inside, resting perfectly preserved on a bed of dry ice, were 3 pristine vials of Rachel's uncompromised blood. Mitchell immediately transferred the vials to a trusted independent forensic toxicologist he kept on permanent retainer for massive corporate litigation. We paid an exorbitant premium to bypass the standard laboratory queue and demand immediate definitive chemical analysis. The agonizing wait stretched out over the next 3 hours. I paced the length of the warehouse, my boots echoing against the concrete, picturing my daughter strapped to that sterile hospital bed, her mind drowning in a chemical fog. Finally, Mitchell's encrypted phone vibrated loudly on the folding table. He answered it, listened intently for 60 seconds in absolute silence, and then ended the call with a sharp, satisfied nod. The original hospital toxicology report, filed by Dr. Harrison, was a complete fabricated lie. Mitchell announced, his voice echoing with a dark resonance. Harrison claimed Rachel overdosed on a massive combination of generic Xanax and alcohol. He certified that her respiratory failure was a direct result of that specific narcotic mixture interacting with her existing sulfite allergy. But the independent forensic sweep just isolated the actual chemical compound currently saturating your daughter's bloodstream. It is not Xanax, Victor. It is an extremely potent clinical variant of Rohypnol, flunitrazepam, a potent rapid-acting central nervous system depressant practically impossible to obtain without specialized medical clearance. Evelyn did not just sedate her. She utilized a controlled chemical restraint strictly in severe psychiatric lockdown wards. It is undeniable physical proof of premeditated malicious poisoning. Derek and Evelyn had officially crossed the line from corporate fraud to attempted homicide. The forged emergency room documents were now nothing more than a signed formal confession of their conspiracy. As the magnitude of the toxicology report settled over us, Leon's dedicated satellite uplink chimed with a rapid, repetitive tone. He had established a secure, closed network connection with Supervisory Special Agent Vance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Elite Financial Crimes Division. Leon had transmitted a heavily encrypted compressed file containing a curated fraction of the data we extracted from Derek's cloned hard drive. It was just enough raw financial data to prove the existence of the offshore embezzlement scheme without giving away our entire leverage. Leon engaged the speakerphone, leaning back in his metal folding chair. The voice that filled the room was deep, authoritative, and vibrating with an unmistakable, hungry intensity. "We have spent the last 8 months trying to crack the corporate shell structure, protecting Thorn Financial Investments," the federal agent stated bluntly, skipping all pleasantries. "Derek Thorn has buried his client portfolios beneath a labyrinth of international banking firewalls. We knew he was bleeding capital, but we could not pinpoint the extraction nodes. The routing numbers and internal communications you just provided bypass years of grueling forensic accounting. The metadata is absolutely authentic. My entire task force is currently salivating at the sheer magnitude of this wire fraud. It is a textbook $12 million Ponzi collapse." The agent paused, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background of the call. "I need the rest of that drive, Leon. I need the master ledgers and the encryption keys to those Cayman Island accounts. I can secure a federal arrest warrant by sunrise." Leon looked at me, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I stepped closer to the microphone, letting the cold, flat authority of a master contractor seep into my voice. "You will get every single byte of data, Agent Vance," I replied evenly, "but you will not execute a single arrest warrant until 9:30 this morning. Derek Thorn is attending a private conservatorship hearing in the county courthouse at 9 o'clock to steal my daughter's mature trust fund. You are going to position your tactical team outside the primary judicial chambers. You will wait until I personally dismantle his legal fortress in front of the presiding judge. When the dust settles, the rest of the hard drive is yours." The federal agent let out a low, appreciative whistle. "We will be waiting in the corridor, Victor. Do not leave a mess." The federal connection severed, leaving the warehouse in a profound, heavy silence. The trap was fully constructed, the explosives were meticulously wired, and the perimeter was completely secured. There was absolutely nothing else left for us to do but patiently wait for the breaking dawn. I left Leon and Mitchell to finalize the legal briefs and drove back to the dilapidated motel as the first faint gray light of Friday morning began to bleed across the eastern horizon. The freezing wind had finally died down, leaving the city locked in a still, biting chill. I walked into my dimly lit room and turned on the small, flickering bathroom light. I stripped off the dark, tactical clothing I had worn during the infiltration of the Thorn estate. I turned on the shower, letting the scalding hot water wash away the sweat, the grime, and the lingering exhaustion of the past 3 days. I needed to wash away the frail, grieving father completely. When I stepped out of the steam, I opened the garment bag I had brought with me from my home. Inside hung a sharp, meticulously tailored dark charcoal suit. It was the armor I used to wear when negotiating massive, critical commercial construction contracts. I dressed with deliberate, methodical care. I fastened the crisp white collar of my shirt, pulled the silk tie perfectly straight, and slipped into the heavy wool jacket. I stood before the cracked mirror hanging above the cheap motel sink and stared at my reflection. The clueless old man was dead, replaced entirely by a ruthless project manager who was finally ready for the ultimate final inspection. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse were thick enough to muffle the sounds of the busy city outside, creating a suffocating vacuum of silence in the private judicial chambers. Inside room 402, the atmosphere was thick with manufactured grief. Judge Thomas Arris, a stern man with 30 years of family court experience, sat high behind the polished mahogany bench. Directly below him at the plaintiff table, Derek and Evelyn Thorne were delivering the performance of a lifetime. They were dressed in immaculate, conservative, dark clothing, perfectly tailored to project quiet, respectful sorrow. Derek sat with his shoulders slumped, his head bowed, clutching a crumpled white tissue in his trembling hands. Every few seconds he would dab at the corners of his eyes, producing an incredibly convincing display of a husband broken by tragedy. Evelyn sat beside him, placing a gentle, comforting hand on his shoulder. She looked the part of the stoic, supportive mother, her face arranged into a mask of polite devastation. "Your Honor," Derek began, his voice cracking perfectly as he addressed the bench. "It breaks my heart to be here today. I have tried everything to help my wife. I have loved Rachel through her darkest moments, hoping she would find the strength to overcome her demons. But the addiction has completely taken over her mind. She is no longer the woman I married. The drugs have made her paranoid, volatile, and profoundly dangerous to herself." Derek paused, taking a shaky breath, letting the silence hang in the courtroom for maximum emotional impact. 2 nights ago, she hit absolute rock bottom. She consumed a lethal mixture of sedatives and alcohol. If I had not found her and rushed her to the emergency room, she would not be alive right now. She needs long-term intensive psychiatric intervention, and she needs to be protected from her own financial resources before she uses them to destroy herself completely. Judge Aris peered over his silver reading glasses, carefully reviewing the thick legal binder Derek had submitted. The binder contained the forged emergency room charts, the manipulated toxicology sweep, and the sworn affidavit from Dr. Harrison. The fabricated evidence was structured flawlessly. "I have reviewed the medical documentation provided by the attending physician," Judge Aris stated, his tone heavy with sympathetic gravity. "The toxicology report clearly indicates a severe and life-threatening chemical dependency. It is always a tragic situation when a spouse must step in to assume total legal control, Mr. Thorne. However, given the overwhelming physical evidence of self-harm and severe psychiatric instability, the court recognizes the immediate necessity of this intervention." The judge picked up his heavy black pen, unscrewing the gold cap. The stroke of his hand would instantly dissolve the autonomy of my daughter, granting Derek absolute access to her $8 million trust fund. It was the final checkmate. At that exact moment, the massive brass handles of the courtroom doors turned, and the heavy oak panels swung violently inward. The heavy thud of the wood hitting the rubber doorstops echoed like a gunshot through the silent chamber. I stepped across the threshold. I wore my tailored charcoal suit, my posture perfectly rigid, my face carved from freezing stone. I did not walk like a frail, broken father seeking pity. I walked like a project manager stepping onto a condemned demolition site. My leather shoes struck the polished marble floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence echoing loudly with every single step, but I did not walk alone. Mitchell marched directly on my right, clutching a thick, leather-bound briefcase filled with our independent forensic evidence. Leon flanked my left side, his posture loose but highly alert, his eyes scanning the room with the calculated precision of a seasoned detective. And directly behind us, moving in perfect synchronized silence, were 2 broad-shouldered federal agents. They wore identical dark suits, their federal badges clipped visibly to their belts, projecting an aura of absolute, undeniable authority. Supervisory Special Agent Vance led the pair, his expression completely devoid of any emotion. The impact of our entrance was instantaneous and physically devastating for the people sitting at the plaintiff table. Derek froze, the crumpled tissue dropping from his hands. The manufactured tears vanished from his eyes, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He stopped breathing, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the wooden table. His carefully constructed illusion was completely shattering right in front of him. He knew exactly what the presence of those federal badges meant. He realized in a fraction of a second that his financial sanctuary had been breached, his offshore accounts exposed, and his entire criminal network laid bare. The walls of his invisible fortress had entirely crumbled, leaving him completely exposed to the harsh light of absolute federal justice and utter ruin. The reaction from Evelyn was entirely different. Her refined, aristocratic mask violently cracked, revealing the ugly, desperate predator underneath. She shot to her feet, the wooden chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. Her face flushed a deep, furious crimson. "What is the meaning of this?" Evelyn screeched, her voice shrill and echoing wildly off the high ceiling. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest, completely abandoning her supportive mother charade. "Your Honor, you must have this man removed immediately. He has no legal standing in this chamber. He is grieving, he is mentally unstable, and he is violently interrupting a private, sealed medical proceeding. You cannot allow this outrage to continue for another second. He is completely out of his mind. He is entirely delusional. He is trying to ruin a highly sensitive legal process intended to save my poor daughter-in-law." Judge Aris slammed his wooden gavel against the sounding block, the sharp crack cutting through the hysterical screaming from Evelyn. "Order in my courtroom!" The judge commanded, his voice booming with absolute, unquestionable authority. He looked down at me, his brow furrowed in severe confusion, clearly disturbed by the sudden invasion of his private chambers. He pointed his gavel toward our group. "Sir, this is a closed hearing. You cannot simply storm through those doors. Who are you, and what is the meaning of this unprecedented interruption?" I did not yell over the lingering echoes of the incredibly frantic outburst from Evelyn. I did not smash my heavy fists against the solid wooden seating benches. I simply walked forward, moving with a very cold, calm, and terrifying certainty. I stopped precisely 3 feet away from the plaintiff table, looking directly into the violently panicked, sweating face of Derek. I could see the ruin reflected in his wide, terrified eyes. I turned my gaze up to the bench, meeting the stern, questioning stare from the judge. My voice was smooth, cold, and heavy with the weight of absolute truth. "Your Honor," I replied, my tone cutting the silence like a scalpel. "My name is Victor Caldwell. I am the father of the woman they are trying to imprison. I am not here to disrupt a medical proceeding. I am here to report a premeditated kidnapping, a calculated chemical poisoning, and a $12 million federal fraud." The silence following my declaration was absolute and heavy. Judge Aris lowered his gavel, his eyes darting between me, the federal agents, and the trembling figures of Derek and Evelyn Thorne. Derek looked as though the floor had completely vanished beneath his expensive shoes. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry wheeze escaped his throat. Evelyn stared at me with hatred, her chest heaving, as she struggled to maintain her facade. She gripped the edge of the plaintiff table so hard, her manicured fingernails dug into the wood. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, stepping forward with smooth, calculated professional grace. He placed his briefcase onto the evidence table and clicked the brass locks open. The sound was sharp and definitive in the quiet chamber. "My name is Arthur Mitchell, financial attorney for Rachel Thorne. We are here to contest this conservatorship with independent evidence proving the plaintiff systematically falsified medical documents to orchestrate a hostile financial takeover." Judge Aris leaned forward, his stern face hardening into a look of severe judicial scrutiny. "Those are incredibly serious allegations, Counselor," the judge warned, his voice dropping an octave. "You are accusing the plaintiff of manipulating a sealed medical proceeding. You had better have the documentation to back up a claim of that magnitude." Mitchell did not flinch. He smoothly pulled a pristine sealed manila folder from his briefcase and handed it directly to the bailiff, who immediately passed it up to the bench. "Inside that folder, Your Honor, is an independent forensic toxicology report," Mitchell explained, his voice echoing with authority. "We procured a legally sound blood sample from Rachel Thorne early this morning, drawn by a nurse at the Silver Pines Wellness Retreat. We bypassed the compromised local laboratories and submitted the sample directly to an independent forensic toxicologist. The results completely contradict the emergency room charts submitted by Mr. Thorne." Derek slumped in his chair, his posture collapsing, as the walls of his medical trap began to crumble. The original report claims she overdosed on Xanax and alcohol. Mitchell continued pacing before the bench. However, the independent forensic sweep isolated the actual chemical compound currently saturating the patient's bloodstream. It is not Xanax. It is a highly potent clinical variant of flunitrazepam, a heavy central nervous system depressant practically impossible to obtain without specialized psychiatric clearance. Furthermore, we have included Rachel Thorne's comprehensive lifetime medical history. Page 4 highlights a severe documented allergy to sulfites. Dr. Harrison deliberately ignored this fatal allergy to validate a false narrative of a panic-induced asthma attack. Judge Aris rapidly scanned the independent laboratory results, his brow furrowing in deep mounting anger. He looked down at Derek, his judicial neutrality replaced by a cold, piercing glare. "Mr. Thorne," the judge demanded, his voice cracking like a whip, "are you aware that falsifying medical records to secure a conservatorship constitutes severe felony fraud?" Derek opened his mouth, stammering, his polished banker persona entirely shattered. "Your Honor, I had no idea," he choked out. "The doctors told me she took those pills. I was only trying to save my wife. I am just a concerned husband trying to protect his family." "That is an absolute lie," I stated, slicing through his excuses. I stepped past Mitchell, walking directly up to the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the legal tables. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out my burner phone. I did not raise my voice, but the cold, heavy resonance of my tone commanded the entire room. "Your Honor, Derek and Evelyn Thorne did not just forge medical documents. They actively, violently poisoned my daughter in her own home to silence her. And I have the recording to prove it." Evelyn shot to her feet again, her face twisting into a mask of pure panic. "This is an outrage," she shrieked, echoing off the walls. "He is fabricating evidence. You cannot allow this unstable man to play unauthorized audio in a closed court session. He is violating our privacy." "Sit down immediately, Mrs. Thorne," Judge Aris roared, slamming his gavel with enough force to make the wood groan. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt and have the bailiffs place you in handcuffs. Proceed, Mr. Caldwell. Let us hear exactly what you have brought to my courtroom today." I walked over to the court clerk's desk and picked up the auxiliary audio cable. I plugged it directly into my phone, bypassing the screen lock completely. I did not look at Derek. I did not look at Evelyn. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the judge. I selected the recovered audio file and pressed play. The harsh static hiss of the hidden recording filled the silent courtroom. The sound of glass shattering against a hardwood floor made Derek flinch violently in his chair. Then the voice of Evelyn Thorne echoed through the judicial chamber, stripped of all her elegance. She fought like a stray dog. Evelyn's recorded voice sneered, the venomous tone making the judge's eyes widen in absolute horror. It was pathetic. When I pinned her down against the floor, she was thrashing and screaming for you to stop. She was begging. But I held her wrists tight. I dug my fingers into her arms until she could not move a single muscle. "You have to be firm with feral things, Derek. You have to break their spirit before you can leash them." I held her perfectly still while you forced the glass against her mouth and poured that mixture down her throat. I watched the color drain entirely from Derek's face. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, watching the executioner pull the lever. Evelyn collapsed heavily into her wooden chair, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving as the audio recording continued to play, destroying every single lie she had ever told. "We erased her voice, Derek, the recorded." Evelyn continued, her cruel laughter echoing through the court. "A suicidal, addicted wife locked in a secure psychiatric ward has absolutely no credibility. If she wakes up and mentions you're missing millions, it will be instantly documented as a paranoid delusion. We own her narrative. We own her medical care. And most importantly, we own her estate." The recording reached its horrifying climax. Derek's own voice cut through the air, smug and utterly victorious. "The paperwork is ready. Once the judge signs it, we pull the plug on her trust. The clinic keeps her a vegetable for the next 10 years. No one will ever believe a junkie." I unplugged the cable. The silence was deafening. Judge Aris sat perfectly still, his face a mask of cold fury. "In 30 years, I have never witnessed such profound malice," he stated. "You attempted to use this court to imprison an innocent woman. The emergency proxy is hereby revoked. This court grants full emergency guardianship to Victor Caldwell. Bring your daughter home." Before Derek could process the loss of the 8 million, supervisory agent Vance stepped forward. "Derek Thorne," he stated, flashing his badge. "You are under arrest for wire fraud and attempted murder." The heavy polished silver handcuffs clicked around Derek's wrists with a sharp metallic finality that echoed through the stunned judicial chamber. Supervisory Special Agent Vance did not pause, his voice cutting through the dead air with absolute, unyielding federal authority. "You have the right to remain silent." Vance recited, his grip firmly locking Derek's arms behind his back. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, criminal conspiracy, and the attempted murder of Rachel Thorne. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Derek did not answer immediately. His knees completely buckled, his expensive Italian leather shoes skidding against the smooth marble floor. He would have collapsed entirely if the second federal agent had not grabbed him by the shoulder, hauling him forcefully back to his feet. The arrogant, untouchable financial predator I had watched swagger into this courtroom just 20 minutes earlier was completely gone. In his place stood a pathetic, broken coward, hyperventilating and weeping openly. The sheer weight of the federal charges was finally crushing the breath out of his lungs. He looked frantically around the room, his wide, terrified eyes darting from the stern face of Judge Aris to the stone-cold expressions of the federal agents. "Wait," Derek suddenly gasped, his voice a desperate, pathetic whine. "Wait, please, you do not understand. You have to listen to me. I did not want to hurt her. I never wanted to hurt Rachel. I was just trying to fix the accounts. The money was just a temporary solution. It was supposed to be a short-term loan to cover the market losses. The physical violence, the drugs locking her away in that horrible place, none of that was my idea. The cowardice was absolute and sickening. As the federal agents tightened their grip on his arms to pull him toward the heavy oak doors, Derek violently twisted his body, turning to face his mother. He threw her under the bus with a desperate, self-serving shriek that filled the entire chamber. It was her. Derek screamed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed his cuffed hands awkwardly toward Evelyn. She orchestrated the entire thing. She is the one who found the clinic. She is the one who paid off Dr. Harrison. She crushed those pills and forced me to put them in the wine. I did not want to do it. She pinned Rachel down to the floor. You heard the recording. She did it. She made me do it. I am the victim here. She manipulated me." The courtroom erupted into pure, unadulterated chaos. Evelyn Thorne, the polished matriarch of North Shore royalty, the woman who had spent her entire life cultivating an image of flawless, untouchable, aristocratic grace, completely snapped. Her refined facade did not just crack. It violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "You pathetic, worthless little worm." Evelyn shrieked, a sound so guttural and raw it barely sounded human. She lunged forward, bridging the short distance between them with terrifying speed. Before the federal agents could react, Evelyn swung her right arm back and struck Derek across the face with a vicious, open-handed slap. The crack of flesh against flesh was as loud as a gunshot. Derek staggered backward, crying out in pain, as a bright red mark instantly blossomed across his pale cheek. "You blame me," Evelyn screamed, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with furious madness. "I spent my entire life cleaning up your miserable, incompetent messes. I built this family. I protected our legacy while you gambled it away like an absolute fool. I did what had to be done to save us from your stupidity. The physical assault was the final trigger." Judge Aris hammered his gavel repeatedly, shouting for the bailiffs to restore order, but the command was completely unnecessary. The heavy-set bailiff stationed by the door was already moving. He crossed the marble floor in 3 massive strides, wrapped his thick arms around Evelyn's waist, and tackled her hard against the plaintiff table. Evelyn thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities that stripped away every last ounce of her elite dignity. The bailiff pinned her arms behind her back, drawing his own set of steel handcuffs. Evelyn Thorne, the bailiff, announced, his voice struggling over her frantic, breathless screeching. "You are under arrest for false imprisonment, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. Stop resisting immediately." She did not stop. She fought with the wild, desperate energy of a cornered predator, thrashing against the wood and kicking her expensive heels against the legs of the table. Her perfectly styled hair was ruined, hanging in sweaty, tangled strands across her face. The designer silk dress she had chosen for her triumphant court appearance was rumpled and twisted. The federal agents and the bailiffs hauled both of them up from the floor, their hands securely locked in cold steel. The physical struggle was over, but the verbal war was just beginning. As they were forcibly marched down the central aisle of the courtroom, Derek and Evelyn completely turned on each other. The toxic, parasitic nature of their relationship was fully exposed for everyone to witness. "I gave you everything," Evelyn roared at her son, violently struggling against the bailiff's heavy grip. "You are a failure, Derek, a complete failure. You ruined our family name. You ruined my life. I hope you rot in a federal cell." "You forced me into this," Derek screamed back, sobbing uncontrollably as the agents pushed him toward the exit. "You controlled every single aspect of my life. You made me do this. You are a monster. You ruined me." They were dragged out of the chamber, their hateful, venomous screams echoing down the long marble corridors of the county courthouse. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, abruptly cutting off their frantic wailing. The absolute ruin of the Thorne family was complete. They had walked into this building as wealthy, untouchable elites, confident in their ability to manipulate the law and destroy my child. They were leaving in disgrace, their wealth exposed as a massive criminal fraud, their reputations permanently destroyed, and their freedom entirely forfeit. They were facing decades in federal prison, and they would spend every remaining second of their miserable lives blaming each other for their ultimate downfall. I stood perfectly still near the wooden railing, watching the doors slowly settle back into their heavy frames. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not speak a single word to them as they were marched past me in absolute disgrace. There was no joy in this victory, no triumphant celebration. The destruction of their lives did not erase the agonizing bruises they had left on my daughter's pale skin, nor did it undo the sheer terror she had endured. The long nightmare was finally over. Now my only priority was ensuring that Rachel was safe and bringing her back home where she truly belonged forever. I turned away from the heavy doors and looked directly at Leon. "Let's go get my daughter," I said. The drive to the Silver Pines Wellness Retreat felt like an eternity, though Leon pushed the tactical vehicle to its absolute limit down the winding highway. Supervisory Special Agent Vance and his federal team followed closely behind us in a convoy of unmarked black SUVs, their sirens silent, but their flashing lights painting the forest canopy in red and blue. The sprawling, isolated facility finally appeared through the tall pine trees, looking less like a medical sanctuary and far more like an impenetrable fortress designed to keep the world out. Leon slammed the brakes, bringing our vehicle to a halt directly in front of the heavy glass entrance doors. We did not wait for the reception staff to grant us access. The federal agents breached the building with overwhelming coordinated precision. The polished, tranquil atmosphere of the psychiatric ward shattered instantly. Armed agents fanned out across the lobby, issuing federal warrants and securing all possible exits. The nursing staff, previously so confident in their shadow authority, froze in absolute terror. Dr. Harrison emerged from a back corridor, his face pale and slick with sweat, demanding to know what was happening. Agent Vance did not waste a single breath on explanations. He simply signaled two of his men, who immediately pushed the physician against the reception desk and clamped handcuffs around his wrists. Mitchell moved swiftly behind the agents, producing the emergency guardianship order signed by Judge Eris and demanding the master key cards for the secure residential wing. I did not wait for the bureaucracy to unfold. My heart hammered against my ribs with a frantic, desperate rhythm as I pushed past the detained staff and marched directly down the hallway. I read the brass room numbers as I walked, My jaw clenched until I reached room 412 at the very end of the corridor. The door was magnetically locked, but a federal agent stepped forward and swiped a confiscated keycard. The lock clicked, and the heavy door swung outward. The room was bathed in a dim twilight. The air smelled of antiseptic and sterile linen. I stepped across the threshold, my breath catching painfully in my throat. There, lying completely motionless on a narrow hospital bed, was my daughter. She looked incredibly small, frail, and pale against the stark white sheets. Intravenous tubes ran from her delicate arm to a silent blinking monitor beside the bed, slowly pumping the paralyzing sedatives into her system. The sight of her stripped of all her energy and reduced to a helpless captive sent a fresh wave of sorrow crashing over me. I walked to the edge of the bed and fell to my knees against the floor. I reached out with trembling hands and gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from her damp forehead. "Rachel," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "Sweetheart, it is Dad. I am right here." Her eyelids fluttered, struggling against the heavy weight of the chemical fog binding her mind. Slowly, agonizingly, her eyes opened. They were glassy and unfocused at first, staring blankly at the ceiling, before slowly tracking downward to find my face. A spark of recognition finally penetrated the heavy sedation. Her lips parted, but she lacked the strength to form the words. She managed a squeeze of my hand. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead gently against hers. "I have got you, sweetheart," I whispered, letting my tears finally fall onto the white sheets. "We are going home. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again." 1 month later, the chill of winter had finally surrendered to the warmth of spring. The sprawling Thorne estate, the mansion where Derek and Evelyn had plotted to destroy my daughter, now sat empty and dark. Federal authorities had seized the property, padlocking the gates and freezing every single asset tied to their criminal empire. The downfall of North Shore royalty had dominated the news cycle for weeks. The scale of their arrogance and greed had left the financial district completely stunned. Derek Thorne, stripped of his tailored suits and his arrogant smirk, had officially pled guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, massive embezzlement, and conspiracy. He was currently sitting in a federal penitentiary, facing a sentence of 25 years without the possibility of early parole. His mother, Evelyn, had fought the charges with a blind fury, but the audio recording and the independent toxicology reports were absolutely insurmountable. She was facing a 15-year sentence for false imprisonment and attempted murder, her social status completely obliterated. The $12 million corporate shortfall was fully exposed, but Rachel's $8 million trust fund remained entirely untouched, securely locked in an independent account, strictly in her name. The money was safe, but more importantly, my daughter was safe. I stood on the back porch of my quiet, modest home holding a steaming mug of hot coffee. I looked out over the sunlit garden, where bright daffodils and purple hydrangeas were beginning to bloom in the morning air. Rachel was sitting near the center of the lawn in a wheelchair, a blanket draped carefully across her lap. She held a cup of chamomile tea in both hands, taking small, slow sips as she absorbed the comforting warmth of the morning sun. The shadows under her eyes had finally faded, replaced by a returning color in her cheeks. The residual weakness from the poisoning was slowly leaving her body, replaced by a quiet, determined resilience. She looked up from her tea, sensing my presence on the porch. She smiled. I smiled back, lifting my mug in a silent salute. I remained on the steps, watching the breeze stir the leaves of the oak tree shading the yard. My mind drifted back over the events of the past month. I realized that a long lifetime spent pouring concrete, aligning heavy steel beams and building structures, had taught me a truth about the world. I knew exactly how to look at an edifice and immediately spot a rotting foundation. The Thorne family had built their entire empire on a crumbling bedrock of lies, manipulation, and greed. They believed their wealth and standing made them untouchable, insulated from the consequences of their cruelty. They thought they could crush anyone who stood in their way, but they had entirely underestimated the deep, unbreakable strength of a father defending his only child from their wicked grasp. I had not needed to stoop to their level of violence or deception. I had not thrown a single punch, nor had I fired a single weapon to bring their fortress down. I had systematically dismantled their entire existence using only cold patience, ruthless logic, and the absolute power of the truth. I had simply gathered the raw materials of their own deception and constructed a trap. Now the cruel monsters were permanently locked in their cold iron cages, their empire reduced to ashes, and their names disgraced. The dark, heavy storm had finally passed, leaving a beautiful, quiet peace in its wake. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my tired lungs with the fresh air of the garden, and stepped down from the porch to join my daughter in the sun. There is a dangerous misconception in society that age equates to obsolescence, and that silence implies ignorance. When arrogance blinds people, they often underestimate the quiet strength of those who have spent a lifetime building and protecting their families. True power does not roar. It observes, it calculates, and it strikes when the foundation of a lie is fully exposed. Never mistake a father's patience for weakness. Deception may offer a temporary illusion of control, but the truth wielded with precise and unyielding logic will always tear down the most elaborate fortresses built on greed and betrayal. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss my upcoming life stories. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Victor's shoes? Let's connect in the comments below. With love and respect.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly,